Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Today, I'm going to be talking about my research on the role of avian grazers, specifically Canada geese, on altering silica availability from an urban river, specifically the Charles River. And as an environmental scientist, my field really is focused on the impacts that urban systems have on water resources and our environment in general. And one way in which urban systems can impact water quality is nutrient inputs from both the built environment and high population densities. You'll see Kilishan is on here, this slide. Entering our freshwater systems, which ultimately lead to our coastal ecosystems. And so nutrient pollution is something that we think about primarily in the context of harmful algal blooms. And while those occur as a result of primarily nitrogen and phosphorus inputs into water systems. And so the inputs from the dense human population in urban environments and from the built environment is well quantified. We know how much nitrogen and all these nutrients are, for the most part, coming off of these environments. But one part that isn't as well quantified or characterized is the impact of these green spaces. So you can see the emerald necklace here and the esplanade. And so my research is looking at those. Specifically, one factor of those green spaces being Canada geese. So over the past 3 decades, Canada geese populations have skyrocketed across North America. And you'll notice that they tend to enjoy these urban green spaces as they really like to graze on turf grass. And bird guano has kind of a notorious source of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer throughout history. And so the nitrogen and phosphorus from these birds has been studied, but there's one other nutrient that's really important when we're thinking about these harmful algal blooms that has not yet been characterized for these birds, and that is silica. So why do we care about silica? When silica is limiting in freshwater environments, there's a higher probability that harmful algal species will grow when you have excess input of nitrogen and phosphorus that causes these algal blooms. However, when you have plenty of silica in your systems, there's a higher you're more likely to have the growth of diatoms, which are kind of friendly neighborhood phytoplankton. They form the base of extremely important food webs, like the cod fisheries off of Massachusetts, and also ecologically important food webs. They play an important role in carbon sequestration in our coastal waters as part of the biological pump. And they form their skeletons out of silica and require the nutrient in an equal molar ratio to nitrogen, which is one of these nutrients that human population densities is increasing in coastal waters. So by increasing when we have increased silica availability, we have increased diatoms, which can lead to healthier, relatively, algal populations in terms of our water quality goals. So as urban grazers, how are geese impacting silica? And we find that in the literature, there's actually a precedent for grazing species to increase the availability of silica in agricultural environments, specifically cows and sheep. So in grazed lands, you have an increased availability of silica. When I talk about silica, I'm talking about it in 2 forms. Primarily, biogenic silica, or BSI, is primarily found within plants and other things that take up silica, and they occlude silica as, think of like a little grain of sand, or smaller, within the organic matrix, cell matrix of a plant leaf or stem or any part of the plant. And they're kind of protected by the organic matrix of the plant. But when they're eaten by cows and sheep and other things that eat grass, they're able to break down this organic matrix that is protecting the silica crystal and allow further accessibility and promote weathering. So in this way, we found that in this study, they found that cows and sheep, when they eat grass, they are actually able to completely remove that organic matrix and convert some of that biogenic silica, that unavailable silica, to dissolved silica, which grass and diatoms can actually take up into their biomass. And they are excreting that in urine, but they are also removing that organic matrix partially and allowing for BSI to weather into DSI more easily after waste has been deposited as feces after digestion. So, are geese doing this? We wanted to know if, as urban grazers, because they do primarily eat grass, if Canada geese were impacting the silica availability of our urban parks. I went to the Esplanade, the study was done on the Esplanade, and picked up both their food source, turf grass, as well as their guano, brought those samples back to the lab, dried them, ground them into a fine kind of powder, and did a chemical extraction using a basic substance in order to determine the amount of biogenic silica, that unavailable silica, in grass and in guano. And I found that there was the same amount of BSI going in as coming out, meaning that geese are not concentrating silica in their feces. This is in contrast to cows, who do in fact concentrate silica in their feces. And this is because they have a more effective digestive system. They're able to remove more of the biomass of their food and incorporate that into their own biomass. But silica isn't absorbed by animals to the same extent other nutrients are, and so it ends up being concentrated. And relatively, geese have less effective digestive systems. So geese aren't impacting silica availability within their digestive system, within their bodies. But after deposition is grazing by geese of guano, increasing the rate of dissolution through the removal of the organic matrix. So to answer this second question, I performed another experiment where I collected rainwater on the top of CAS. You can see Warren in the background. And river water from our site. I performed a dissolution experiment where I put dried samples of grass and guano in different water types and measured the amount of dissolved silica in the water that from the soaking of the samples in the water at different time points to determine if over time dissolution was occurring at different rates. So we found some interesting results. On our x-axis on the bottom, we see time in hours, up to 48 hours, and on the y, the concentration of silica from different sample types. The bottom blue is your rainwater, and you see there's no change in silica, and that it's around 0. So already we see a limitation of silica in the in our environment. It's not coming from the rainwater, sorry. And in grass, we see this constant dissolution, and in guano, we see this accelerated dissolution. The guano is twice as high as the grass, the green, for most time points from 0 to 24, meaning they're doubling the rate in which BSI is dissolved. We also did this experiment for river water, and we found no difference in the model terms between dissolution types. So what does this mean? So we see that the breakdown of organic matrix is occurring in both cows and geese. And although cows are more effective at doing this, perhaps because their digestion time is 24 to 48 hours compared to geese's about 30 minutes, it's also important to note that we don't have cows grazing on the Boston Common anymore, but we do have a lot of geese. So geese have accessibility to environments that these other more traditional grazers do not. Additionally, we can think of this as geese being the zooplankton of terrestrial ecosystems, because when zooplankton graze on diatoms, they're doing the same thing. They're removing the organic matrix, increasing the accessibility to that biogenic silica in a diatom, and thus increasing dissolution rates. So scaling this up, the population of geese in Boston contribute about 1.4 million grams of guano per day, which is a lot. And therefore they create a pool of biogenic silica on land, meaning that they mobilize this much silica a year. Compared to the amount of stormwater coming off of Boston, this is a very small number. And so in conclusion, we can't say that geese are going to solve the silica limitation problem. And I want to make it clear that I'm not suggesting more geese as a water quality management solution, but that they are acting as biocatalysts and increasing the availability of silica in the environments in which they thrive. And with that, I'd like to thank my lab and have any questions. Yeah, Wally?
Julia, so if you were going to do this experiment again, what would be the thing that you would change?
What would I change? I think I would change I would also look at the the current data on the Charles River itself and try to look at relative to what's already in the Charles, if geese are impacting it on local scales, so like in the lagoons of the Charles River, or other more like on a smaller scale, maybe the pond in the Boston Harbor, because other studies have shown that in like enclosed lakes, up in Canada and other places where migratory geese will descend, they'll cause eutrophication events and then they'll leave and it'll recover. So maybe these geese are causing more extreme impacts locally rather than in the large extent of the lower basin of the Charles River. Kathleen?
You said that silica hadn't been really categorized yet, I think. So did you have trouble finding like sources and information on this to start?
Yeah. Well, luckily, I work in Full Wiley Lab, and we tend to do a lot of silica research. So I had incredible mentors to help me with that. And in fact, my graduate student, or formerly graduate, now PhD student, mentor did a lot of work on the impact of the built environment of Boston on silica availability. So having those resources within Arms Reach was definitely really helpful for this project. Yeah.
Do you see any other kind of urban grazers that could possibly contribute to the silica availability in urban environment, or are Canada geese kind of one specific to Boston or just specific to cities?
So they're definitely not specific to Boston. Kind of across the country, we're seeing pretty large management issues in trying to control these urban and suburban populations that no longer migrate. So that's a whole issue. But in terms of other urban grazers, I've been thinking about that. And so I would say that geese, probably by net, just by their physical size, probably the biggest like macro grazer in urban environments. The other ones that I've been thinking about, rabbits also eat grass. Kind of just thinking about other things that you see eating turf grass may also play a similar role. But this was especially interesting in that avian grazers, research hadn't been done on avian grazers, so birds' digestive systems relative to like ruminants and like other large traditional grazing species. So it's interesting that even with a completely different digestive setup, that geese are doing this as well. Yeah. Any questions? Awesome. Thank you so much.